Top administration officials briefed lawmakers on Iran earlier today on Capitol Hill as they try and determine how big of a threat the country poses. Well, acting Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan said that the threat in Iran remains high. But he also said the potential for attacks on Americans has been, quote, put on hold. National Security Advisor John Bolton was not present during today's briefing. He's been one of the administration's loudest voices against Iran, but Bolton has privately briefed some senators. South Carolina Republican Senator Lindsey Graham was among those to speak with Bolton, and yesterday he tweeted, "It is clear that over the last several weeks, Iran has attacked pipelines and ships of other nations and created threat streams against American interests in Iraq." Graham also encouraged President Trump to stand firm. The briefings come as Iran's President Hassan Rouhani says that the situation between the U.S. and Iran is, quote, not suitable for diplomacy. Rouhani says resistance is the only option to deal with sanctions. President Trump insists that Iran will come calling when they are ready. Well, following the briefing, Chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Democratic Congressman Adam Smith, spoke to reporters.
Well, we still don't have a clear idea of what the administration's objectives are. They have said over and over again the regime change is not the objective. What is the maximum pressure campaign trying to achieve? What do we exactly want Iran to do, and how have we calculated that what our behavior is and their reactions is going to get us to that point? So that's concerning. There was a lot of talk in the briefing about how there's a huge risk of Iran miscalculating, striking in a way that gets a response they didn't anticipate. I think there's risk for miscalculation on both sides, and that remains my biggest concern.
I want to bring in Behnam Ben Taleblu. He's a senior fellow at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. His organization has advised the Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations on Iran policy. So, Behnam, why do you think it is that Rouhani's maintaining a hard line and not really giving in on these diplomatic talks?
I think it's because Rouhani understands leverage. And while under year one of max pressure, the Rouhani administration, and Iran in particular, was looking to wait out the Trump administration, once it realized how costly the sanctions had become, now it's looking to build up leverage. And the way you do that is to begin to turn up the fire on many of the regional conflicts, as well as begin to signal that you have options to escalate on the nuclear file as well. And then once you create a sense of balance of risk, that the longer Washington keeps its sanctions policy going, the riskier it'll become. Tehran is betting now that Washington will continue to seek out it and negotiate. That's why I think the Iranians want to stand firm. But it's imperative that the Trump administration not swerve and keep up the pressure. So while the Trump administration is keeping up these sanctions pressures, what point becomes too much for Iran that they don't have the luxury to walk away from talks? Well, they would first have to enter these discussions, and I think there's a series of macroeconomic indicators the Trump administration should be looking for. It should be looking to make sure that Iran's rial, the currency on the unofficial market, continues to depreciate severely against the U.S. dollar. It should be making sure that those oil exports, which should be at zero by now but are not, are really clamped down, and there are enforcement actions against entities, companies, banks, countries, or any jurisdiction that supports the ship-to-ship transfer of oil exports by Iran that lets the country continue to get revenue from oil sales. So there's a whole series of things we need to be looking for in the Iranian economy to understand that it is contracting. And then once you see those signals, and Iran really can't provide for both butter and guns, that the regime will turn to the table. And then you've got Iraq, which is interesting. They reportedly want to send officials to both Washington and Tehran to help ease tensions. We know very senior officials in the Iranian leadership have been to Iraq recently. What role do you think that country could play? Well, Iraq, most unfortunately, is something that I call a contested domain. It's one of these areas where it's ripe for escalation, intended or unintended, of the U.S.-Iran enmity and conflict right now. And, of course, Iraq has long been a backyard to part of that strategic competition when it turned bloody. During the 2003-2011 occupation of Iraq, Iran and Iran-backed forces killed countless American soldiers, as well as coalition soldiers with the IEDs and EFPs in that country. So Iraq doesn't want this to happen again, and is probably looking to offset some of these escalating threats from both countries. And it would be wise for Iraq to be able to tamp down some of the more concerning voices, particularly in its neighbor, Iran. And Benham, as you know, sometimes wars start over misunderstandings. Well, the president says he doesn't want a war with Iran, and Iran seems like they don't want one either. What are you most concerned about as someone who watches this region closely? It would be something like that. It would be an unintended conflict. But the reason conflicts happen is misread signals. But a misread signal is not just looking at an Iranian missile and calling it defensive or offensive. A misread signal is the product of a lack of consistent messages. And I think the Trump administration needs to be consistent in its approach to Tehran. And I think the more it entertains these notions of private talks or public talks or wanting to meet the Iranians, the more it risks undercutting its own already efficacious pressure policy. It sent a strong signal by having the carrier come near the Persian Gulf. It sent a strong signal by restoring and enforcing and adding to sanctions. It shouldn't dilute its own pressure policy in the face of the first Iranian threat.
Behnam Ben Taleblu. Benham, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.